I've heard it said that a man is either born in these mountains or he spends his whole life trying to get to him. I guess you could say that was the case with me. It was just like the old folks used to claim, ain't no use in trying to stop destiny. You see, I cut my teeth in the swamps of North Carolina, but as it turned out it would be these mountains of Appalachia that define my life and my legacy that still sends shockwaves across those hills and hollers. But we'll get to that soon enough. My name is Michael John Shornock. I was born in Carteret County, just outside the sleepy coastal town of Swansboro, North Carolina. In many ways, my parents were drifters, moving from state to state in search of a better life. So I guess you could say I was pretty good at quickly adapting to new surroundings. It was here in the rich lowlands that Paul tried his hand at farming on a rented patch of land while I spent my time exploring the creeks and the rivers. Now there was plenty to do for a curious boy, crabbing, shrimping, and climbing. I love the outdoors, and I love to camp for days at a time in the Croatan National Forest. One day I hiked a few miles deep into the woods following old animal trails when I ran upon a makeshift camp. It was here that I met a lady who'd been living off the grid for decades, all alone with her animals. She had withdrawn from society and survived by hunting and fishing. I was fascinated by our lifestyle and we quickly became friends. Over the next few years, I would spend weeks at a time in her camp where she taught me how to track animals, build weapons like blowguns and bow and arrows, and how to shoot guns, and how to completely disappear in the woods. And these turned out to be the skills that would define my life. By the time I was 18, I was an expert outdoorsman in every sense of the word. I couldn't stand to be cooped up in a building. I needed to be outside. I took up carpentry work and I bounced around between North Carolina and Florida from job to job and many times paycheck to paycheck. Yet no matter where I was, I would always gravitate towards the nearest wilderness area, disappearing into the mountains or some swamp for weeks at a time. I was just so restless and free-spirited. For the most part, I just wanted folks to leave me alone. And it was about this time that I began to have a few run-ins with the law. First, it started with traffic stops and tickets, and it seemed like I could never catch a break when it came to cops. They just didn't like me, and if the truth be told, I didn't like them. Each traffic-stopped cop would always turn into a confrontation with some random cop demand and respect just because he had a government badge pinned across his chest. And me, I'd look him right in the eye and tell him to go to hell. It seemed like something changed in me. I started to resist all forms of any authority, and I became fearless. Once I saw a brand new Chevy Monte Carlo with the keys in the ignition sitting at a car lot. I don't know what came over me, but I hopped right in and I drove it like it was mine. I loved the adrenaline rush I felt as my hands gripped the wheel, listening to those pipes scream as I roared down the highway. It was addicting because a few weeks later I stole a Jeep just for fun, and I led state troopers on a 27-mile chase before I pulled over and jumped into a river and swam to a small island where I was captured a few hours later and jailed. That night I escaped police custody again, and I was on the run in the woods for 3 days before the cops finally caught up with me. Just like that, I was sent to prison for 3 years. By August 1986, I was 21 years old, just paroled, and a changed man. Prison will do that to a fella. I had a bitterness in my heart and a burning desire to get even. I still remember the day I got out of prison. My mama looked at me and she said, "Son, that look in your eyes, it scares me. I don't even know who you are anymore." And I told her right then to be ready because my trouble with the law was just beginning, and I swore to her that they would never catch me again. By September, I had quit my construction job, and I failed to report to my parole officer, and a warrant was issued for my arrest. But that was the least of my problems. You see, I once again had led cops on a 3-county car chase when they tried to execute their warrant. It lasted all the way to nightfall when I ditched my stolen car and disappeared into the Croatan National Forest. The next day they had a dozen dogs and a helicopter comb in the woods looking for me. But by then I had stole a 14-foot boat with a 25-horsepower engine, and I was long gone. For the next 4 weeks I traveled by water back down to Florida, but I needed money and food pretty bad. So I robbed a pawn shop and I stole 10 guns, and then I robbed a restaurant at gunpoint in Wrightsville Beach and a pizza place down in Brunswick, Georgia. By the time I made it to Central Florida, I was spotted at Port Orange where I was trying to steal some gas out of Marina, and I was spotted by the cops. I dove into the water, and I managed to swim away, but I was still desperate and still needed food. So I camped outside a home, and I waited till morning when I saw a man drive away headed to work. I didn't see any lights on in the house, so I figured it was empty, and I broke in through a window where I was greeted by a pit bull. It was attacking my leg, so I shot him. It was then that I heard a scream, and I realized that the man's wife was still home. I told her I wouldn't hurt her, but I needed food, so she warmed up some spaghetti from the previous night, and after I ate, I stole a motorcycle from the garage and I was on the run again. Before long, a highway patrolman pulled me over in Brevard County, Florida, and I was tired of playing games. I reached into my jacket to pull my pistol, but before I could, the deputy fired at me from behind his car door, but he missed, and I darted into the sawgrass and disappeared yet again, despite a 2-day search from helicopters and bloodhounds. By now, there seemed to be no turning back for Michael John Shornock. He was a convicted felon on the run who had just committed a string of armed robberies, including holding a woman hostage in her home, and he had evaded 2 manhunts by police in North Carolina and Florida. Yet despite their efforts, the wanted man was nowhere to be found before he resurfaced a month later in Cape Carteret, North Carolina, where he robbed a bank and shot 2 police officers during his escape. Now he was tired of running up and down the eastern coast, so the fugitive stole a car, and he headed for the Appalachian Mountains of western North Carolina for a final showdown that would captivate the nation. On the morning of November 26, 1986, Shornock's stolen Buick was spotted in Edneyville, where he was flinging an empty beer bottle out onto the highway. When the highway patrolman attempted to pull the fugitive over, Shornock pointed his .357 Magnum out the driver's side window, and he blew a hole clean through the windshield of the highway patrolman's car. In that moment, Michael John Shornock exited his car, dressed in full military camouflage, with several weapons, including a machine gun strapped across his back, and he disappeared into the woods of Sugarloaf Mountain. For the next 4 days, nearly 450 cops from 30 different law agencies would comb this mountain looking for what every newspaper in America was calling the search for the real Rambo. Roadblocks were placed on every paved and dirt road leading up to Sugarloaf. Every vehicle was searched by armed law enforcement anytime anyone attempted to go up or down the mountain. 12 families were evacuated and forced to leave their homes during the manhunt, yet many mountaineers refused to leave and simply loaded every rifle and shotgun and vowed to protect their homesteads at all cost. Armed guards were seated on the front of every school bus taking children to school. Police set up outposts on every side of the mountain and formed a human wall surrounding the mountain. That's the largest manhunt in North Carolina history was underway. But there was a thick fog that had settled on the mountain, so thick that one cop said he could only see the tail wagon from his K9 on the end of his 15-foot leash. All helicopters and planes were grounded due to zero visibility. It didn't matter, though. Dozens of officers set out into the thick mountain laurel and ravines only to be welcomed by Shornock, because this was his turf, and it seems that he knew all officers were wearing bulletproof vests, so he shot for their heads, firing off nearly 50 rounds from a machine gun, blowing a hole clean through a special agent's face and shooting another highway patrol, only to have the bullet ricochet off the officer's firearm, saving his life. The paddle lines were drawn, and Shornock wasn't backing down, and the outlaw didn't appear to be running from the law. Instead, he was waiting for him. Day 2 and Day 3 of the manhunt was more of the same. Heavy fog and several gun battles. Shornock had wounded 2 more officers and they couldn't pin the wanted man down. He was cunning and seemed to know every next move the law would make, and there he would be waiting with more gunfire. By the 4th day, the fog finally broke, and the roar of single-engine search planes and the barking of anxious bloodhounds echoed through the hills. One by one, officers in uniforms and fatigues with handguns strapped to their sides and bulletproof vests hugging their torsos, they searched the near-vertical mountain. Their unshaven faces and rain-soaked clothed and bloodshot eyes told the story that the fugitive was still at large. The aircraft soon spotted in an abandoned barn in a remote area, and a team of 24 cops went to clear the area. They and carefully searched each horse stable, and when it came to the last one, as soon as they opened the door, Shornock opened fire, hitting both cops as he took off running across the field. But the lawmen, you see, they had set up a perimeter around the area, and all hell broke loose. Bullets kicked up dirt all around the outlaw as he ran and dove into a ravine, yet within no time, the officers had flanked all sides. Shornock never stopped firing, blowing leaves and mud into the sky as he shot up the entire bank surrounding the ditch. He was determined to go out in one final blaze of glory as he refused to surrender. In this final showdown, as most lawmen were ducking for cover, one SWAT team member managed to get behind Shornock and he took aim. One shot rang out, shooting the renegade right through the head and finally ending a 3-month crime spree across 4 states.